The classroom buzzed with quiet conversation as students from 12 different worlds settled into their seats. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood at the front, her 4 tentacles moving gracefully as she prepared the day's lesson. Her blue-green skin shimmered under the artificial lights of Kepler Station, and her large eyes scanned the room with the practiced ease of someone who had taught for 30 years. The Galactic Military Academy drew the best minds from across known space. Today's advanced xenobiology class was no different. Crystalline beings that looked like walking diamonds sat next to fuzzy creatures with 6 arms. A student whose body was made of flowing energy kept changing colors as he took notes. Near the back, a hive mind representative communicated silently with the voices in her head, but Elena's attention kept drifting to one student in particular. Maya Thompson sat in the 3rd row, and she stood out like a sore thumb, while her classmates wore the latest bioenhancement suits and neural interface headbands. Maya looked almost primitive by comparison. Her standard academy uniform was clean and pressed, but around her neck hung something that made Elena's skin crawl. Bones. Small carved bones strung together on a simple cord. Elena had noticed them on the first day of class 3 weeks ago. At first, she thought perhaps it was some kind of human religious symbol. But as the days passed, she realized Maya wore different bones each day. Sometimes they were white and smooth. Other times they were yellow with age. A few were carved, with strange markings. The other students noticed too. Elena caught them staring and whispering when Maya wasn't looking. Zeph Catal, a Christine student whose body rang like a bell when he moved, had asked Elena privately if humans still practiced ritual sacrifice. Nix Vorthak, the hive mind representative, mentioned that her collective found the bone display disturbing and primitive. Elena tried to focus on the lesson. Today they were studying evolutionary adaptations in hostile environments. She pulled up a holographic display showing various species and how they had changed over millions of years. As we can see, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of study, intelligent species move beyond their primitive origins as they develop technology and join galactic society. The hegemony abandoned their early tribal warfare. The Christines stopped their ritual crystal-singing contests. Even my own people, the Altarians, gave up our ancient tentacle-dancing ceremonies. She gestured to the display. This is the natural progression of civilization. We leave behind the crude barbaric practices of our ancestors and embrace logic, science, and unity. Elena's eyes drifted to Maya again. The human was taking notes, seemingly unaware of the attention she was drawing. The bones around her neck caught the light as she moved her head. Some beings, Elena continued, letting a slight edge creep into her voice, cling to outdated rituals and primitive displays. They haven't learned that such behavior has no place in a modern, civilized society. A few students glanced at Maya. The human looked up from her notes, met Elena's gaze for a moment, then returned to writing. If she understood the comment was directed at her, she showed no reaction. Zeph Catal raised his crystalline hand. When he spoke, his voice chimed like wind through crystal caves. Commander, what about species that refuse to abandon their primitive practices? Should they be forced to modernize? Elena smiled. This was exactly the opening she wanted. An excellent question, Cadet Zeph Catal. The answer is that true civilization requires leaving behind the barbaric customs of the past. We cannot allow primitive thinking to contaminate our advanced society. She clicked to the next slide, showing images of various primitive practices from different worlds. Ritual scarification, ceremonial weapons, traditional clothing made from animal hides. These practices, Elena said, represent everything we've moved beyond. They're remnants of a time when beings acted on instinct and superstition rather than logic and reason. Maya's pen stopped moving. She looked up again, and this time Elena saw something in her expression. Not anger or embarrassment, but something else. Something that made Elena's tentacles twitch nervously. However, Elena continued, warming to her subject. We must be patient with those who haven't yet learned to let go of their past. Some species take longer to evolve beyond their primitive origins. The classroom was completely quiet now. Even the energy being had stopped changing colors. Everyone was looking between Elena and Maya, sensing the tension in the air. Maya raised her hand. Elena hesitated. She had hoped to make her point without direct confrontation, but Maya was forcing the issue. Yes, Cadet Thompson? May I ask a question, Commander? Of course. Maya stood up slowly. The bones around her neck shifted and clicked softly together. What if those primitive practices actually serve a purpose? What if they carry meaning that logic alone can't understand? Elena's tentacles stiffened. This was exactly the kind of backward thinking she was trying to address. Cadet Thompson, surely you're not suggesting that superstition and ritual have value in a modern military academy? I'm suggesting, Maya said calmly, that maybe we shouldn't judge things we don't understand. A ripple of whispers went through the classroom. Some students nodded in agreement. Others looked shocked that Maya was challenging their instructor so directly. Elena felt her authority being questioned in front of the entire class. Her blue-green skin darkened with irritation. Cadet Thompson, your accessories are a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Wearing animal bones is exactly the kind of primitive behavior that has no place in civilized society. Maya was quiet for a long moment. She looked around the classroom, meeting the eyes of her fellow students. Some looked curious. Others seemed embarrassed for her. A few appeared disgusted. Commander, Maya said finally, would you like to know why I wear these bones? Elena's first instinct was to say no, to simply order Maya to remove them and move on with the lesson. But something in the human's tone made her pause. There was no defiance there, no anger, just a quiet confidence that made Elena unexpectedly nervous. Very well, Elena said. Enlighten us, Cadet Thompson. Tell us why you cling to these primitive displays. Maya reached up and touched the bones around her neck. Would it be all right if I showed you instead of just telling you? Elena's tentacles writhed with annoyance. The human was turning this into a spectacle, but backing down now would make her look weak in front of the class. Fine, Elena said. Show us what these bones mean to you. I'm sure it will be very educational. Maya nodded and began to remove the cord from around her neck. As she did, Elena felt a strange chill run through her tentacles. Something in Maya's expression had changed. The quiet confidence was still there. But now there was something else underneath it. Something that looked almost like pity. Maya carefully placed the cord of bones on her desk. The small classroom had gone completely silent except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Every eye in the room was focused on the simple string of carved fragments that had caused so much attention. Commander Rodriguez's tentacles moved restlessly as she watched Maya arrange the bones in a neat line. The Altarian instructor had expected the human to back down, to mumble some excuse and put the bones away. Instead, Maya seemed perfectly calm. almost serene. "Well?" Elena prompted, trying to regain control of the situation. "We're waiting for your explanation, Cadet Thompson." Maya looked up from the bones and scanned the faces around her. Zeph Katal's crystalline features reflected the classroom lights like a prism. Nyx Vorthak sat perfectly still, her hive mind collective silent for once. Near the window, a student with blue fur and huge eyes leaned forward in curiosity. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "These aren't just bones," Maya said simply. "They're stories." Elena's skin darkened another shade. "Stories? Cadet Thompson, bones are biological remnants. They don't tell stories." "This is exactly the kind of primitive thinking I was discussing. You're right that they're biological remnants," Maya agreed. "But you're wrong about the stories." She picked up the smallest bone from the line. It was no bigger than her thumb, white and smooth with tiny carved symbols along one edge. This bone came from a Zarathi war hunter. The reaction was immediate. Several students gasped. Zeph Katal's body rang out a sharp, alarmed tone. Even Elena's tentacles went completely still. Zarathi war hunters were legendary across the galaxy. 12 feet tall, covered in armored plates, with claws that could cut through starship hull material. They were apex predators from a world where everything tried to kill everything else. Most civilized species avoided Zarathi space entirely. "That's impossible," Elena said. "Humans don't hunt Zarathi. Your species doesn't have the technology or the physical capabilities." Maya nodded. "You're absolutely right. We don't. That's what makes this story interesting." She held up the small bone, turning it so the carved symbols caught the light. "My grandfather was Lieutenant Colonel Jack Thompson. 30 years ago, his unit was stationed on Proxima 7 doing mineral surveys. They thought it was a dead world." Maya's voice took on the rhythm of someone telling a story she'd heard many times before. "They were wrong. A Zarathi war hunter had been stranded there for months, maybe years. It was starving and angry and desperate. When it found my grandfather's unit, it went completely wild." The classroom was so quiet that the soft beeping of someone's medical monitor seemed loud. Elena wanted to interrupt, to point out that this was all irrelevant, but something in Maya's tone kept her silent. "The Zarathi killed 18 soldiers in the first 5 minutes," Maya continued. "Their weapons barely scratched it. Their armor was like paper to its claws. My grandfather watched his friends die one by one." She paused, looking down at the bone in her palm. "The smart thing would have been to run, to call for evacuation and let someone else deal with it. That's what most species would do." "But humans are not most species," said a quiet voice from the back of the room. Elena turned to see who had spoken. It was Kes Nortai, a usually silent student from the meditation worlds. His large golden eyes were fixed on Maya with something that looked like understanding. Maya smiled at him. "No, we're not. My grandfather didn't run. He studied the creature while it was killing his unit. He noticed that it favored its left side when it turned. He saw that it was slower after each attack, and he realized it was sick." Elena's tentacles twitched impatiently. "Cadet Thompson, this story doesn't explain why you wear—" "The Zarathi had been eating poisonous plants to survive," Maya continued, ignoring the interruption. "It was dying slowly. That made it desperate, but it also made it weak. My grandfather figured out its pattern, waited for the right moment, and attacked." She held up the bone again. "He killed it with a combat knife and an explosive charge. 2 pieces of equipment that any species in this room would consider primitive. He carved this bone from its claw afterward while he was dying from the wounds it gave him. The room was completely still. Elena stared at the small bone in Maya's hand, trying to process what she was hearing. A human had killed a Zarathi war hunter with primitive weapons? Before he died, Maya said softly, "My grandfather gave this bone to my father. He told him to remember that sometimes the only thing standing between innocent people and monsters is someone willing to stand and fight, even when they can't win." She placed the bone carefully back on the desk and picked up another one. This one was longer and yellowed with age. "My great-aunt Captain Lisa Martinez took this from a Zephyrian battle crab during the Outer Rim conflicts. Those things are the size of shuttlecraft and their shells can deflect plasma cannons. Lisa killed it by crawling inside its mouth and setting off a thermal detonator." Elena's skin was now a deep purple blue, the Altarian equivalent of shock. "These stories? Are they real?" Maya looked at her with those same calm eyes. "Every one of them. Would you like me to continue?" Before Elena could answer, Nyx Vorthak spoke up. Her voice was different than usual, less mechanical. "My collective, we've heard stories about human military actions. We thought they were exaggerated." "They usually are," Maya agreed. "Reality is usually worse than the stories." She picked up a third bone, this one carved with intricate patterns. "My uncle Major Kevin Thompson took this from a void swimmer that was attacking civilian transports in the Epsilon system. Void swimmers are energy beings that live in space. Most species can't even touch them without special equipment." "How?" Zeph Catal chimed, his crystalline voice full of wonder. "He put on a pressure suit, tied himself to a shuttle with a cable, and let the creature swallow him," Maya said matter-of-factly. "Then he detonated an electromagnetic pulse grenade inside it. The feedback killed the void swimmer and nearly killed him too." Elena's tentacles were now writhing in agitation. These stories challenged everything she thought she knew about humans. They were supposed to be a young, primitive species. Weak, dependent on technology they barely understood. "But why keep the bones?" Elena asked, her voice smaller than before. "Why carry these reminders?" Maya looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because someone has to remember what they died for. Someone has to carry the weight of what they sacrificed." She gestured to the line of bones on her desk. "Each one of these represents a choice. A moment when someone decided that protecting others was more important than protecting themselves. That's not primitive, Commander. That's the most advanced. Thinking any species can achieve." Elena stared at the bones, her scientific mind trying to categorize and analyze what she was hearing. But for the first time in her career, logic and reason weren't enough to process what she was learning. Maya picked up another bone, larger than the others, and Elena realized they were only getting started. Maya held the larger bone carefully in both hands. It was different from the others, darker and heavier, with deep grooves carved along its surface. The entire classroom seemed to hold its breath as she examined it. "This one is special," Maya said quietly. "It came from my cousin, Sergeant Amanda Foster." Elena noticed that Maya's voice had changed. The earlier confidence was still there, but now there was something deeper underneath it, something that made the Altarian instructor lean forward despite herself. "Amanda was part of the defense force during the Silicon Valley campaign," Maya continued. "Most species don't know about that conflict because it happened in a remote system. No major trade routes, no strategic resources. Just a small human colony and a research station. Zefkatal's crystalline body chimed softly. What made it worth fighting for? Maya smiled, but it was a sad expression. Nothing, from a military standpoint. 12,000 civilians and a few scientists studying rock formations. Any logical analysis would say it wasn't worth defending. She turned the bone over in her hands, tracing the carved grooves with her fingertips. But humans don't always follow logical analysis. When the Crystalline Confederation decided they wanted that system for a military outpost, they sent a harvester fleet to clear out the population. Elena's tentacles twisted uneasily. She knew about harvester fleets. The Crystalline Confederation used them to strip planets of unwanted populations before colonization. The process was efficient, clean, and completely ruthless. The human defense force had 6 ships, Maya said, old patrol boats and cargo haulers with improvised weapons. The Harvester fleet had 43 vessels, including 3 World Cracker-class destroyers. Those are impossible odds, Nix Vorthak stated, her collective clearly agitated. No species fights under those conditions. Retreat is the only logical option. You're right, Maya agreed. Retreat was the logical option. Amanda's commanding officer actually ordered the evacuation, told the defense force to pull back and let the civilians fend for themselves. Elena felt a chill run through her tentacles. And did they? Maya's grip tightened on the bone. Some did. 7 ships retreated to safe distance and waited for the slaughter to begin, but Amanda and 5 others refused the order. They stayed to fight. The silence in the room was complete now. Even the station's background hum seemed muted. Elena found herself leaning forward, caught up in the story despite her better judgment. The Crystalline Confederation was confident, Maya continued. They sent their bioweapons first, creatures designed to terraform planets by eliminating existing life forms, massive things, each one the size of a city block. She held up the bone, and Elena could see now that the grooves weren't decorative. They were scars, marks left by something incredibly sharp. This bone came from one of those creatures. Amanda killed it by flying her patrol boat directly into its core and detonating her ship's reactor. The explosion took out the bioweapon and damaged 3 of the Harvester ships. But she died, Kesnortai said softly from the back of the room. She died, Maya confirmed, and her sacrifice gave the colony time to evacuate most of the civilians. The other 4 pilots followed her example. They turned their ships into weapons and died protecting people they'd never met. Elena's scientific mind struggled with the concept. But why? What did they gain from dying? Maya looked at her with those calm eyes, and Elena saw something there that she'd never noticed before. It wasn't primitiveness or backward thinking. It was something much more complex. They gained time, Maya said simply. Time for others to escape. Time for help to arrive. Time for 12,000 people to live instead of die. She placed the bone back on the desk and picked up another one. This one was smaller, almost delicate, with symbols carved so finely they looked like script. This bone tells a different kind of story, Maya said. It came from my great-great-grandmother, Corporal Nancy Williams. She served during the first contact wars, back when humans were just beginning to meet other species. Elena's tentacles stiffened. The first contact wars were ancient history studied mainly by academics. They'd happened when humans were barely capable of interstellar travel. Humans back then were even more primitive than we are now, Maya continued. No energy weapons, no force fields, no advanced medical technology. When the hegemony tried to establish dominance over Earth, humans had to fight with chemical explosives and projectile weapons. Projectile weapons? Zefkatal chimed in disbelief. Solid objects fired by chemical propulsion? Maya nodded. Bullets, grenades, missiles with warheads. Completely primitive by galactic standards. The hegemony thought it would be over in days. She held up the delicate bone. Nancy was part of a unit that held a mountain pass for 17 days against a hegemony assault force. They had no food, no medical supplies, and no hope of reinforcement. Every logical analysis said they should surrender. But they didn't, Elena said, and she was surprised to hear that it wasn't really a question. They didn't, Maya confirmed. Nancy's unit held that pass until human reinforcements could arrive. They fought with weapons that couldn't penetrate hegemony armor. They ate bark and melted snow for water, and they died, one by one, holding the line. Maya's voice grew softer. Nancy was the last one alive when help finally came. She'd been wounded so badly that the medics didn't think she'd survive transport. But she carved this bone from her own rib while she was dying. She wanted her family to remember that sometimes the weakest person in the room is still strong enough to matter. Elena stared at the tiny bone, trying to process what she was hearing. A human had carved a piece of her own skeleton to leave a message for future generations. These stories, Elena said slowly, they're not about victory, are they? Maya shook her head. Most of them are about defeat, about people who fought impossible odds and lost everything except their principles. She gestured to the remaining bones on the desk. Every one of these represents someone who chose to stand and fight when running away would have been smarter, safer, more logical. But why remember the defeats? Nix Vorthak asked, her collective clearly struggling with the concept. What purpose does it serve? Maya picked up another bone, this one thick and scarred. Because someone has to remember that they tried. Someone has to carry forward the idea that some things are worth dying for, even when you can't win. Elena felt something shifting in her understanding of the human species. All her life, she'd been taught that intelligence meant moving beyond primitive emotions like sacrifice and honor. But Maya's stories suggested something different. They suggested that perhaps those emotions weren't primitive at all. How many more bones are there? Elena asked quietly. Maya looked at the remaining fragments on her desk. There were still 4 left, each one larger and more scarred than the ones she'd already shown. Enough, Maya said simply. Enough to tell you why humans wear bones instead of just remembering stories. She picked up the next bone, and Elena could see that her hands were beginning to shake slightly. Whatever stories remained, they were the hardest ones to tell. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the next bone. It was larger than the others, yellow with age, and covered in intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story all by themselves. Elena noticed that several students had moved closer, drawn in by the weight of what they were hearing. This bone, Maya said, her voice quieter now, tells a story that most humans prefer not to remember. It came from the Battle of New Terra. Elena's tentacles went completely still. Every educated being in the galaxy knew about New Terra. It was studied in military academies as an example of everything that could go wrong in a defensive action. New Terra was supposed to be humanity's first real colony world, Maya continued. Not just a research station or mining outpost, but a place where families could build new lives. 500,000 civilians had settled there over 20 years. She turned the bone in her hands, and Elena could see that the carvings depicted scenes of battle. Tiny figures fighting enormous shapes that could only be enemy war machines. The Void Collective decided that New Terra would make a perfect staging ground for their expansion into human space, Maya said. They brought everything: planet crackers, atmosphere processors, bioweapons that could sterilize continents. Zeph Katal's crystalline form rang with a low, mournful note. The Void Collective doesn't negotiate. They don't accept surrender. No, they don't, Maya agreed. They came to New Terra to end the human species once and for all. Kill everyone, harvest the planet's resources, and use it as a base to attack Earth. Elena found herself leaning forward. She knew how the Battle of New Terra had ended, but she'd never heard it told from a human perspective. The defense of New Terra lasted 6 months, Maya continued. The human fleet was outnumbered 20-1. The ground forces had to fight, with whatever they could improvise, and every day more civilians died. Maya's grip tightened on the bone. This bone came from my great-uncle, General Robert Thompson. He commanded the ground forces during the siege. I've read about General Thompson, Nix Vorthak said, her hive mind collective unusually focused on a single voice. Military historians consider him a tactical genius. Maya smiled, but there was no joy in it. Robert wasn't a genius, he was just desperate. When you're watching children starve and you can't do anything to help them, you learn to think in ways that no academy teaches. She pointed to one of the carved scenes on the bone. This shows the 3rd month of the siege. The Void Collective had surrounded the main city. No food coming in, no medical supplies, no hope of evacuation. Elena studied the tiny carved figures. They seemed to be fighting from inside buildings, using the city itself as a weapon. Robert ordered the civilians to dig tunnels under every major building, Maya explained. Not for escape, but for demolition. When the Void Collective attacked, the humans would collapse entire city blocks on top of the invading forces. That would kill the defenders, too, Kes Nortai observed quietly. It did, Maya confirmed. Thousands of humans died in the tunnels, but they took out 3 Void Collective divisions and bought time for the evacuation of the outer settlements. She traced another carving with her finger. This scene shows the 5th month. The humans had retreated to the mountains, but they were still trapped. The Void Collective had orbital superiority and could bomb them from space whenever they wanted. How did they survive? Elena asked, forgetting for a moment that she was supposed to be criticizing human primitiveness. They didn't survive, Maya said simply. That's the point. Robert knew they were all going to die, but he also knew that every day they held out was another day for human ships to reach Earth and prepare defenses there. Maya's voice grew softer, more personal. Robert sent his final message to Earth 6 days before the end. It said, "We can't win, but we can make them pay for every inch. Remember us not because we were brave, but because we chose to matter." The classroom was completely silent. Elena could hear her own hearts beating in the stillness. The weight of Maya's words settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. The bone itself came from Robert's last stand, Maya continued. The Void Collective had finally broken through the mountain defenses. They offered him surrender terms if he would order the remaining humans to lay down their weapons. Did he accept? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. He laughed, Maya said. According to the survivors, he actually laughed. Then he picked up his rifle and led a charge straight into the Void Collective's main position. She held up the bone, showing Elena the deepest of the carved marks. This groove was made by the claw of a Void Collective war form. The creature that killed Robert carved it there while it was killing him, but Robert managed to detonate the ammunition depot they were fighting over. The explosion took out the war form and half the Void Collective's assault force. Elena stared at the bone, trying to understand the mindset that would carve a memorial from the weapon that had killed its subject. It seemed simultaneously primitive and profound. Robert's sacrifice gave the evacuation ships enough time to escape with the remaining civilians, Maya said. 300,000 people lived because he chose to die. She placed the bone back on the desk and picked up another one. This one was smaller but somehow seemed heavier, more significant. This bone tells a more personal story, Maya said. It came from my brother, Lieutenant Daniel Thompson. He died 2 years ago. Elena's tentacles curled involuntarily. The other bones had told stories from history, events that happened decades or centuries ago. This was different. This was immediate and real. Daniel was serving on the monitoring station at Kepler 9, Maya continued. It was supposed to be a safe assignment. The station just watched for asteroid impacts and monitored solar activity. Maya's voice grew tighter, more controlled. But the station's reactor had a design flaw, a cascade failure that could have caused a chain reaction in the system's star. If that happened, the explosion would have destroyed everything within 50 light years. Including 3 inhabited worlds, Elena breathed. Maya nodded. 47 million people. Daniel was the only one qualified to perform the manual shutdown, but it meant going into the reactor core during the cascade failure. The radiation would kill him in minutes. Elena felt her skin changing color as she processed what Maya was saying. And he did it anyway. He did it anyway, Maya confirmed. He saved 47 million lives and died alone in a radiation-flooded reactor core, knowing that no one would ever see what he did. Maya's hands were shaking now as she held her brother's bone. This fragment was all that was left of him after the radiation exposure. The rescue team found it fused to the reactor controls. The silence in the room was absolute. Elena realized that several students were crying, their various anatomies expressing grief in different ways. Even Nix Vorthak had gone completely still. Her collective focused entirely on Maya's words. Why keep it? Elena asked softly. Why carry such painful memories? Maya looked at her with eyes that seemed much older than her years. Because someone has to remember that he mattered. Someone has to carry forward the knowledge that when it came down to it, he chose other people's lives over his own. She placed Daniel's bone carefully on the desk with the others. There are 2 more bones, Commander. Do you want me to continue? Elena looked at the line of bones on Maya's desk, each one representing a sacrifice she was only beginning to understand. Her scientific mind told her this was all emotional nonsense, primitive thinking that had no place in a modern military academy. But another part of her, a part she'd been trying to suppress for 30 years of teaching, whispered that maybe she was the one who didn't understand. Yes, Elena said quietly. Please continue. Maya reached for the second-to-last bone with hands that were noticeably shaking now. This bone was different from all the others. It was larger, darker, and carved with symbols that seemed to move in the classroom light. Elena could see that. It had been shaped by someone who knew they were creating something permanent, something meant to last. This bone, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper, came from my mother. Elena's tentacles drew back involuntarily. The other bones had been historical artifacts, pieces of family legacy passed down through generations. But Maya's mother would have been alive recently, maybe even still living. Colonel Patricia Thompson, Maya continued, Commanded the defense fleet during the Battle of New Terra. The space battle, not the ground fighting my great-uncle led. Elena realized with a start that Maya was talking about the same battle she'd just described. The Thompson family had been fighting on multiple fronts of the same impossible war. The space battle lasted 9 days, Maya said, turning the bone in her hands. 47 human ships against 900 void collective vessels. The humans knew they couldn't win, but they had to buy time for the evacuation transports to escape. Zeph Catal's crystalline form chimed softly. Those odds are mathematically impossible to overcome. You're right, Maya agreed. But my mother had an advantage the Void Collective didn't expect. She knew her ships were going to be destroyed anyway, so she could use them in ways no rational commander would consider. Maya traced one of the symbols on the bone. This marking represents the day she ordered her flagship to ram a Void Collective dreadnought. The impact destroyed both ships, but it also created a debris field that blocked the enemy's sensors for 6 hours. Elena found herself leaning forward despite her discomfort. She survived the ramming? Barely, Maya said. The collision threw her across the bridge and shattered her left leg so badly that the bone fragments punctured her armor. But she kept commanding the fleet from the medical bay while the medics tried to save her leg. Maya's voice grew tighter. On the 7th day, the medics told her they had to amputate. The bone was too damaged to repair, and infection was setting in. She would die if they didn't operate immediately. But she let them do the surgery, Elena said, trying to find some normal point of reference in the story. Maya shook her head. She refused. The evacuation wasn't complete yet. She told the medics that she would rather die commanding her fleet than live knowing she'd abandoned them. The classroom was completely silent. Elena could hear the soft breathing of a dozen different species, all focused on Maya's words. The medics operated anyway, Maya continued. They removed the infected bone while she was unconscious from blood loss. When she woke up, she was furious. Not because of the pain, but because they'd made the decision without her consent. Maya held up the bone, and Elena could see now that it was carved with incredible detail. Tiny ships, star patterns, and symbols that seemed to tell an entire story. She took the bone fragment they'd removed and carved it herself, Maya said. While she was still recovering, still commanding the fleet, still fighting a war she couldn't win. She carved every detail of the battle onto her own bone. Why? Kes Nortai asked softly. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Because she wanted me to understand what she'd learned, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand and fight, even when you know you're going to lose. Especially when you know you're going to lose. Elena stared at the bone, trying to process the concept of someone carving their own skeleton while fighting a desperate battle. It seemed simultaneously horrifying and beautiful. The human fleet held for 2 more days after her surgery, Maya continued. Long enough for the last evacuation transport to escape. My mother's ship was one of the last destroyed, and she went down with it. But you said she gave you the bone, Nix Vorthak observed, her collective clearly struggling with the timeline. Maya smiled through her tears. She had it delivered to me before the final battle, along with a message that said, remember that we chose to matter, not because we were strong enough to win, but because we were strong enough to try. Elena felt something fundamental shifting in her understanding of human nature. All her academic training had taught her that intelligence meant avoiding unnecessary risk, preserving resources, making logical decisions. But Maya's stories suggested a different kind of intelligence entirely. "The last bone," Elena said quietly. "What story does it tell?" Maya looked at the final bone on her desk. It was the smallest of all of them, barely larger than her thumbnail, but it seemed to carry more weight than all the others combined. "This one," Maya said, "is mine." Elena's tentacles recoiled. "Yours? But you're alive." Maya nodded. "I am. But this bone represents a promise I made, a commitment that I'll honor when my time comes." She picked up the tiny bone fragment, and Elena could see that it was carved with a single symbol, a star surrounded by smaller stars. "I carved this from my own rib 6 months ago," Maya said matter-of-factly. "When I decided to join the academy, it represents my promise to continue the family tradition." "What tradition?" Elena asked, though she was beginning to understand. "The tradition of standing between innocent people and the things that want to hurt them," Maya said simply. "The tradition of choosing to matter, even when you can't win." Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Every human military family has this tradition. We carve a piece of ourselves before we enter service. It's our way of saying that we understand the cost, and we're willing to pay it." She held up the small bone. "When I die in service, this bone will be given to the next generation of my family, along with all the others. They'll carry them forward and add their own when the time comes." Elena stared at Maya with new understanding. This wasn't primitive thinking or backward superstition. This was something far more complex and profound. "You expect to die in service?" Elena said. "I hope to die in service," Maya corrected, "because that means I'll have found something worth dying for." The weight of that statement settled over the classroom like a heavy blanket. Elena looked around at her students and saw that every one of them was staring at Maya with expressions of awe, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "But why?" Elena asked desperately. "Why choose death over survival? Why value sacrifice over success?" Maya carefully arranged all the bones in a line on her desk. 7 fragments, 7 stories, 7 examples of humans choosing principle over pragmatism. "Because someone has to," Maya said simply. "Someone has to be willing to stand and fight when everyone else runs away. Someone has to care more about protecting others than protecting themselves." She looked directly at Elena. "You asked why? I wear bones, Commander. This is why. Not because I'm primitive or backwards, but because I carry the weight of everyone who came before me. And someday, someone else will carry mine." Elena stared at the line of bones on Maya's desk, her mind struggling to process everything she had heard. 7 stories of sacrifice, 7 examples of humans choosing death over defeat, 7 fragments of a tradition that challenged everything. She thought she understood about civilization and progress. "I don't understand," Elena said finally, her voice smaller than she intended. "Your species has technology now. You have energy weapons and force fields and medical systems that can heal almost any injury. Why cling to these reminders of ancient failures?" Maya looked at her with those calm, patient eyes. "Because they weren't failures, Commander. That's what you're not seeing." "But they died," Elena protested. "Every person you've told me about died. How is that not failure?" Maya picked up her grandfather's bone, the small fragment from the Zarathi war hunter. "My grandfather died, yes, but the survey team he was protecting lived. The colony they were trying to establish survived and grew into a major trading hub that supports millions of people today." She moved to the next bone. "My great-aunt Lisa died destroying that battle crab, but her sacrifice saved a convoy of refugee ships carrying families fleeing from war zones. Those families founded 3 New colonies that are still thriving. Elena's tentacles writhed in confusion. But surely there were other ways, better ways, more technological solutions. Were there? Maya asked gently. Lisa had access to the most advanced weapons humanity could provide. The battle crab shrugged them off like raindrops. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the simplest. 1. Zeph Katal's crystalline form chimed with uncertainty. But your losses, the cost in lives. Maya nodded. The cost is enormous. We know that. Every human military family knows that. But we also know what happens when no one is willing to pay that cost. She gestured to the classroom around them. This academy exists because beings from different worlds chose to work together instead of destroying each other. But that choice only matters if someone is willing to defend it when it's threatened. Nix Vorthak's collective spoke through her in a voice that sounded strangely fragmented. My people, we've always believed that survival is the highest goal. Preserve the collective at all costs. We don't understand voluntary death. I'm not sure we understand it either, Maya admitted. But we've learned something about survival that other species might have missed. Elena found herself leaning forward despite her confusion. What have you learned? Maya was quiet for a moment, looking at the bones on her desk. We've learned that there are things worse than death. And we've learned that sometimes the only way to truly survive is to be willing to die for something bigger than yourself. She picked up the bone from her cousin Amanda, the one who had died defending the colony during the Silicon Valley campaign. Amanda could have retreated with the other ships. She could have lived to fight another day, found a more strategic position, waited for reinforcements that might never come. That would have been the logical choice, Elena said. Yes, it would have, Maya agreed. And 12,000 people would have died while she was being logical. Instead, she chose to die so they could live. Tell me, Commander, which choice leads to better survival for the human species? Elena's tentacles went still as she considered the question. From a purely mathematical standpoint, Maya was right. Saving 12,000 lives at the cost of 6 was an excellent trade ratio, but emotional decisions like that can't be sustained, Elena argued. You can't build a civilization on individual acts of heroism. Maya smiled, and for the first time it was a truly happy expression. Can't you? Commander, every story I've told you has one thing in common. The person who died saved more people than they lost. My grandfather saved his survey team. Lisa saved the refugee convoy. Amanda saved 12,000 colonists. She gestured to all the bones. This isn't random heroism. This is a calculated strategy that's been tested over centuries. When humans choose to sacrifice themselves, they make sure that sacrifice counts for something. Kes Nortai spoke from the back of the room, his voice thoughtful. So the bones aren't just memorials, they're tactical lessons. Exactly, Maya said. Each bone teaches the next generation how to make their death matter, how to turn defeat into victory by choosing the right moment to sacrifice yourself. Elena felt a chill run through her tentacles. You're talking about weaponizing death itself. No, Maya said firmly. We're talking about weaponizing the willingness to die. There's a difference. A weapon destroys things. Willingness to die protects things. She held up her mother's bone, the one carved with the details of the space battle. My mother didn't destroy the Void Collective fleet. She couldn't. But her willingness to die bought time for evacuation ships to escape. The weapon wasn't her death. It was her choice. Elena's scientific mind tried to categorize what Maya was describing, but it didn't fit into any of her academic frameworks. It wasn't tactics or strategy or technology. It was something else entirely. How do you teach something like that? Elena asked. How do you pass down the willingness to die? Maya touched the bones gently, one by one. Through stories. Through examples. Through carrying the weight of everyone who came before you. She looked up at Elena. That's why we wear the bones, Commander. Not as primitive decorations or superstitious talismans. We wear them as reminders of our responsibility to the future. Responsibility? Elena asked. Every person who died for these bones believed that future generations would be worth their sacrifice, Maya explained. They died trusting that someone would carry their story forward and learn from their example. Maya's voice grew stronger, more confident. When I wear these bones, I'm carrying forward the promise that their deaths mattered. I'm accepting the responsibility to be worthy of their sacrifice. Elena stared at the young human, seeing her clearly for the first time. Maya wasn't primitive or backwards. She was carrying the accumulated wisdom of centuries of human sacrifice, distilled into 7 small fragments of bone. And when you die, Elena said slowly, your bone will carry the same message. Maya nodded. My bone will tell future generations that some things are worth dying for, that protecting innocent people is more important than protecting yourself, that being willing to sacrifice everything is the highest form of civilization any species can achieve. Elena's tentacles trembled as she processed the implications of what Maya was saying. Human civilization wasn't built on technology or logic or scientific advancement. It was built on the accumulated weight of individual choices to value others more than themselves. Commander, Maya said gently, you asked why humans cling to primitive practices when we have advanced technology. But what if you have it backwards? What do you mean? Maya gestured to the bones. What if this isn't primitive at all? What if this is the most advanced thinking any species has ever achieved? Elena stared at the line of bones, each one representing a choice that prioritized others over self. For the first time in her academic career, she wondered if perhaps civilization wasn't about moving beyond sacrifice and heroism. Perhaps civilization was about learning to make those sacrifices count. Elena stood silently at the front of the classroom, her tentacles trembling as she watched Maya carefully return each bone to its place on the simple cord. The weight of the stories she had heard seemed to press down on her like a physical force. Around the room, her students sat in complete silence, each processing what they had witnessed in their own way. Commander, Maya said softly as she lifted the cord back around her neck, may I ask you something? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. In all your years of study, in all your research into primitive behaviors and ancient customs, have you ever found a single tradition that lasted for centuries without serving some practical purpose? Elena's tentacles curled as she considered the question. As a scientist, she knew Maya was right. Evolution didn't preserve useless behaviors, whether biological or cultural. If humans had maintained this bone-wearing tradition through centuries of technological advancement, there had to be a reason. No, Elena admitted quietly. Traditions that serve no purpose eventually disappear. Maya nodded. So if humans still wear bones after developing space travel and energy weapons and quantum computers, what does that tell you about the purpose they serve? Elena looked around her classroom, seeing her students with new eyes. Zeph Katal's crystalline body reflected the lights in patterns that seemed less alien now, more like another way of carrying forward the wisdom of past generations. Nyx Vorthak sat perfectly still, her hive-mind collective clearly debating concepts they had never encountered before. "It tells me," Elena said slowly, "that perhaps I don't understand human culture as well as I thought I did." Maya smiled gently. "Commander, can I tell you one more story? Not about a bone this time. About why I really came to this academy?" Elena found herself nodding before she could think about it. 3 months ago, Maya began, I was home on Earth, helping my family prepare for my deployment here. We were going through old records, old documents, trying to understand our family's military history. Maya's voice took on the same storytelling rhythm she had used before. We found something interesting. A pattern that goes back almost 400 years to the very beginning of human space travel. She paused, looking around the classroom. Every major conflict humans have fought, every war, every battle, every desperate last stand, has one thing in common. We were always outnumbered. We were always outgunned. We were always facing enemies who were stronger, faster, smarter, or more technologically advanced than we were. Elena's tentacles stiffened as she realized where this was leading. Earth has been attacked 47 times in the last century, Maya continued, not counting small raids or border skirmishes. 47 full-scale invasion attempts by species that considered humans an inferior race, suitable only for extermination or slavery. But Earth is still free, Kes Nortai observed quietly. Earth is still free, Maya agreed. And do you know why? Not because humans are the strongest species in the galaxy, not because we have the best weapons or the most advanced technology. Earth is free because every time someone tries to destroy us, there are humans willing to die to stop them. Maya's hand moved to touch the bones around her neck. This tradition isn't just about remembering the past. It's about preparing for the future. Because as long as there are bullies in the galaxy, as long as there are species that think might makes right, humans will need people willing to stand and fight impossible odds. Elena felt a chill run through her entire body. You're saying humans expect to keep fighting. We don't expect to, Maya corrected. We prepare to. There's a difference. We hope for peace, but we prepare for war. We work for cooperation, but we ready ourselves for conflict. She gestured to the mixed species, classroom around them. This academy exists because different species chose to work together instead of destroying each other. But that choice only means something if someone is willing to defend it when it's threatened. Nyx Vorthak's collective spoke through her in a voice that sounded different than before, more individual. You're saying that peace requires the threat of violence. I'm saying that peace requires people willing to pay the price of violence, Maya replied. Not because we want to fight, but because sometimes fighting is the only way to protect the things we care about. Elena's scientific mind tried to reject what Maya was saying, but the evidence was overwhelming. Human military history was a 400-year record of impossible victories achieved through sacrifice and determination. But surely, Elena said desperately, surely civilization should be moving beyond such primitive concepts. Surely we should be finding better ways to resolve conflicts. Maya nodded. We should and we are. But while we're working toward that better future, someone has to guard the present. Someone has to stand between innocent people and the beings who would hurt them. She touched the bones again. That's what these represent, Commander. Not a glorification of war or death, but a commitment to protection, a promise that no matter how advanced we become, no matter how peaceful the galaxy grows, there will always be humans willing to be the guardians. Elena looked around her classroom one more time, seeing her students as individuals rather than representatives of their species. Each one carried their own history, their own traditions, their own ways of understanding honor and duty and sacrifice. "I owe you an apology," Elena said finally, her voice carrying across the silent room. "All of you. I've spent 30 years teaching about primitive behaviors and advanced civilizations, but I never understood what those words really meant." She looked directly at Maya. "I thought civilization meant leaving behind the need for sacrifice and heroism. I thought advancement meant solving problems with logic and technology instead of courage and determination." Elena's tentacles moved in patterns that expressed regret and newfound understanding. "But you've shown me something I should have realized years ago. True civilization isn't about avoiding sacrifice. It's about making sure that when sacrifices are necessary, they're made by people who understand what they're dying for." Maya smiled, and Elena saw in that expression the same calm certainty she had noticed from the beginning. But now she understood what it represented. It wasn't primitive stubbornness or backward thinking. It was the confidence that came from carrying forward the wisdom of generations. "Commander," Maya said gently, "would you like to know why I really requested your class specifically?" Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she was ready for another revelation. "Because I wanted to learn from you," Maya said simply. "I wanted to understand how other species think about civilization and progress in the future. Because if humans are going to keep protecting the galaxy, we need to understand what we're protecting." Maya's voice grew stronger. "We need to know that when we die, it will be for something worth dying for. And that means understanding not just human values, but the values of every species we serve alongside." Elena stared at Maya, finally understanding the true depth of what she had witnessed. This wasn't just about human military tradition. It was about a species that had taken on the responsibility of protecting others, even at the cost of their own lives. "What do you need from me?" Elena asked. Maya's smile widened. "Help me understand what civilization means to your people. Help me learn what the Altarians value most, so that if I ever have to die protecting it, I'll know why that death matters." Elena felt tears forming in her large eyes as she realized what Maya was asking. The human wanted to learn about other species, not to conquer them or control them, but to better understand how to protect them. For the first time in her teaching career, Elena understood that she wasn't just educating students about xenobiology. She was helping to prepare guardians who might someday die to protect everything she held dear. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same classroom, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed cultural artifacts from dozens of species, each one representing their unique approaches to honor, duty, and sacrifice. What had started as a lesson about primitive behaviors had evolved into something far more profound. Maya sat in her usual seat in the third row, but she was no longer alone in her traditions. Zefkatal wore a crystalline pendant that held the harmonic frequencies of his ancestors' greatest songs. Nyx Vorthak carried a small device that allowed her to commune with the memory patterns of her hive mind's fallen heroes. Even quiet Kes Nortai had begun wearing a meditation bead carved from the heartwood of his homeworld's oldest tree. "Today," Elena announced to the class, "we're going to discuss something that every military officer needs to understand. Not tactics or strategy or technology, but the deeper question of what we're fighting for." She gestured to Maya. Cadet Thompson, would you please begin? Maya stood, her bone necklace clicking softly as she moved. Over the past months, Elena had watched her transform from an isolated human into a bridge between species, someone who helped others understand not just human traditions, but their own as well. 6 months ago, Maya began, Commander Rodriguez asked me why I wore bones. I told her the stories behind each one, but I think I missed the most important part of the answer. Elena found herself leaning forward, curious about what Maya had learned during their months of cultural exchange. I wear these bones not just to remember human sacrifice, but to remember that sacrifice means something only when it protects things worth protecting. And to know what's worth protecting, you have to understand what different people value most. Maya turned to Zeph Catal. I've learned that the Christine people believe that harmony is the highest achievement of any civilization. Their ancestors died not for territory or resources, but to preserve the songs that hold their culture together. The crystalline student chimed softly in acknowledgement. And I have learned that human courage comes not from fearlessness, but from being afraid and choosing to act anyway. Maya nodded and turned to Nix Vorthak. The hive mind species teaches us that true strength comes from unity, from the willingness of individuals to subordinate their own desires for the good of the collective. Nix spoke in her own voice, not her collective's. Humans have taught me that sometimes the collective is best served by individuals who think for themselves, who question orders when those orders are wrong. Elena watched this exchange with growing amazement. What had begun as a confrontation about primitive human customs had evolved into a deep exploration of what different species considered sacred. Kes Nortai, Maya continued, has shown us that the meditation worlds understand something about inner peace that most warriors never learn, that the strongest fighters are often the gentlest people, because they know the true cost of violence. The golden-eyed student spoke quietly. Maya has taught us that meditation without action is empty, that inner peace means nothing if you're not willing to defend others who seek the same peace. Elena felt a profound shift in her understanding as she listened to her students. They weren't just learning about each other's cultures. They were weaving those cultures together into something new, something stronger than any single tradition. The point, Maya said, addressing the entire class, is that every species has something worth protecting. Every culture has developed its own understanding of what makes life meaningful. And every tradition of sacrifice, no matter how different, it looks on the surface, serves the same fundamental purpose. She touched the bones around her neck. These bones don't just represent human values. They represent the promise that when other species need protection, there will be humans who understand what they're protecting and why it matters. Elena stepped forward, her tentacles moving in patterns that expressed deep respect. Cadet Thompson, 6 months ago, I called your traditions primitive and barbaric. I owe you and this entire class an apology for my ignorance. She looked around the room at all her students. But more than that, I owe you my gratitude. You've taught me that. True advancement isn't about abandoning the past, but about understanding why the past still matters. Elena's voice grew stronger. I've spent my career studying the evolution of intelligent species, but I missed the most important lesson. Evolution doesn't just discard old traits. It preserves the ones that serve essential functions, even if those functions aren't immediately obvious. She gestured to Maya's bones. Human military traditions have survived centuries of technological advancement because they serve a function that technology can't replace. They create people who understand that some things are worth dying for. Elena turned to address the entire class. But as I've learned from all of you, Every species has its own version of this understanding. Every culture has found its own way to create people willing to sacrifice for others. Zeph Catal chimed in harmony with his pendant. The Academy should teach all these traditions. It should, Elena agreed, and it will. I've proposed a new curriculum to the Academy administration. A course in cultural military heritage that will help future officers understand not just how to fight, but what they're fighting for. Nix Vorthak's collective spoke through her. Who will teach such a course? Elena smiled. All of you. Every species, every tradition, every understanding of duty and honor and sacrifice, because the best guardians are the ones who know what they're guarding. Maya raised her hand. Commander, I've received my assignment orders. I'll be leading a mixed species, reconnaissance unit on the frontier. We'll be working with species I've never met, protecting colonies I've never seen. Elena nodded. And how do you feel about that responsibility? Maya touched her bones one more time. Ready? Because now I understand that these bones don't just carry human stories. They carry the commitment to learn every story worth protecting. She looked around the classroom at her fellow students. And I won't be carrying that commitment alone. Elena watched as Maya's classmates stood one by one, each touching their own cultural symbols. Zeph Catal's pendant rang with a clear, pure note. Nix Vorthak's device hummed with the voices of her collective. Kes Nortai's meditation bead caught the light like a small star. You're all going to different assignments, Elena observed. Different ships, different units, different sectors of space. But we're all carrying the same mission, Maya said. To protect what's worth protecting, even if we don't understand it at first. To learn what different people value and to be willing to die for those values when necessary. Elena felt tears forming in her large eyes as she understood what she was witnessing. These students weren't just graduates of a military academy. They were ambassadors of the idea that sacrifice could be universal, that every species could contribute to the protection of all species. In my official report, Elena said, I'm going to recommend that all of you be promoted to squad leader positions, not because of your tactical skills or academic achievements, but because you understand something that many officers never learn. What's that? Maya asked. That the strongest military force isn't the one with the best weapons or the most advanced technology. It's the one where every member understands what they're fighting for and why it matters. Elena looked around her, transformed classroom one final time. Class dismissed. Go forward and guard the galaxy, all of it. As the students filed out, Maya paused at Elena's desk. Commander, thank you for asking why I wore bones. It led to something I never expected. What's that? Maya smiled, and Elena saw in that expression the same calm certainty she had noticed months ago. But now she understood it came not from stubborn tradition, but from the profound confidence of someone who knew their purpose. It led to understanding that I'm not just carrying forward human traditions, Maya said. I'm carrying forward the best of every tradition. And when my time comes to add my bone to this necklace, it will represent not just human sacrifice, but the promise that all species can learn to protect each other. Elena watched Maya leave, carrying her bones and her expanded understanding of what they represented. For the first time in her teaching career, Elena felt that she had truly educated a student, not just about biology or culture or history, but about the deepest purpose of civilization itself. The question was no longer why Maya wore bones. The question was, how many other guardians could learn to carry forward the protective traditions of every species they served? Elena looked at her, transformed classroom, and smiled. She had work to do,